And our next questioner is Deputy Owen Murphy.
Thank you, Governor. I just wanted to pick up on that area of discussion that we left off on before the short break. And it's in relation to your role then when it actually came to negotiations, when it came to that period of time in 2010. Because you talk in the book, in Calm and Crisis, you wrote a chapter with Brian Honohan about the Deauville Declaration and how essentially, in terms of market confidence, the die was cast and there was going to be an application for a bailout. So at that point, is there no turning back, in your view? Was that it?
Well, I mean, the Deauville Declaration, as the market started to appreciate what it meant, was a departure from tradition, where traditionally if governments got into trouble, but they should be able to get out of it, the IMF would come in, provide a loan to tide them over. Now the Deauville Declaration seemed to be saying, oh no, if governments are in trouble, first hit has to be taken by the private bondholders, and then there'll be assistance. So actually, Jean-Claude Trichet was very much on top of this. He could see the market dynamic that was going to follow from this because he'd understood all these debt negotiations over years and years, and he was very alarmed at this development. It took the markets a few days to realize that, but then it added to step by step other pressures came on, and as the spreads on Irish government debt went up and up, that was the trigger for me to recognise that things couldn't get back. Could they have recovered from the Deauville Declaration? They tried to say, well, when we talk about this, it'll only be later, not now. But the markets
it was done.
So I don't see it as the only factor. No.
It seems clear that the ECB was in favour of Ireland entering a programme from September of 2010. But was that ever communicated to you from Mr. Trichet or at the board that we think, the ECB, that Ireland should apply for a programme?
The first time it was communicated in any sort of formal way was in what date are we talking about? I guess it was the 11th of the 11th of November, when no, it's Friday the 12th of November, after the famous discussion in Seoul. Yeah, but from September, informally, colleagues at the ECB were saying, don't you think you should be thinking, don't you think you should be talking to the EFSF people, the IMF? So there were these informal suggestions in a collegial way, and I would like to emphasise that. And there's a tendency for people to look for demons here, and in particular, Jean-Claude Trichet was a very forceful and definite person. It really felt himself to be, and I believe was, a friend to Ireland. When Ireland wasn't doing what he thought they should be doing for their own good, then he got sort of schoolmarmish about it, but it was very much he felt it was the right thing to do.
So an ECB team came to Dublin in September, but in October, towards the end of October 25th, a team from Ireland went to Brussels. And this was effectively, from what's in Kevin Carter's long statement, the first salvo in the opening.
Which date are we talking about again?
25th of October, an Irish delegation goes to Brussels.
Yes. Yes, that's right. But yes, that's not. I don't think the central bank is involved in that at all. I would have been aware of that meeting, but yes.
He says he goes in. They attend the first part of the meeting with the Commission, and it maintains for a brief moment the fiction that the ECB was present to deal mostly with banking matters. So, just commenting on that idea of this fiction that they were only there to deal with banking matters, the role the ECB played. Were you kept informed of the role that they were taking in the negotiations, and did they overstep the mark?
Oh, they're two very different questions. I wasn't kept very closely informed of what they were doing because, and in fact, the Governing Council, and this is true for all the programmes, the Governing Council of the ECB, which is my interaction with the ECB machinery, it does not examine the details of the programmes and minimum wages and, social welfare payments and tax rates. None of that is discussed by the ECB Governing Council. The ECB is somewhat distant from the negotiations, but of course it's a powerful figure because it holds the purse strings on the banking system.
Writes about that being a fiction, that they're somewhat at a distance.
No,
While they
I'm
haven't
talking
signed
about
the
the
agreement,
governing-
they're there at the negotiations.
That's
They're
right.
playing
No,
a
they are,
part in
and they're
those
very
talks.
powerful. Even though they are not providing any money in the loan, they are providing money through another channel to the banking system. So it is a very complex relationship.
Have they that authority, though? Do the ECB officials have the authority to be in the room, getting involved in those kind of detailed discussions that are
They
outside
have
of
the authority, but they are required under the ESM treaty, I think it is now, that these sort of loans require the ECB to be present at it in this liaison role. So they have been mandated by the European Council and by the political structure to be there. Now, is that a good idea or not? I think it's not a good idea, but it is not something that they have simply taken on themselves. They have been given that mandate.
Okay, coming then to the end of the negotiations, and you have written in that same chapter in the Honohan book, it was on Friday the 26th of November that the Troika staff told Brian in categorical terms that burning the bondholders would mean no programme and accordingly could not be countenanced. For whatever reason, they waited until after this showdown to inform me of this decision, which had apparently been taken at a very high-level teleconference to which no Irish representative was invited. So we spoke about that teleconference with Mr. Cardiff, and we've had it in other evidence, but what do you mean that for whatever reason they waited until after this showdown to inform me of this decision? Should you have been party to those discussions?
Not exactly, but I wonder why they didn't have me in the room, or did they feel that ECB?
Yeah.
ECB and the Troika. I mean, there was a meeting with Brian Lennon and I don't know who else was there, Kevin Cardiff and sort of finance staff. I just wondered why did they feel that I would be in an awkward position But I wouldn't have been in an awkward position because they knew which side of the table I was on the Irish side all the time. However, I knew fairly quickly after it, but it was a bit odd, I thought, when we had discussed as NTMA, Department of Finance, NTMA and Central Bank all along.
Sorry, you'd be on the Irish side of the table all the time. And that's clear to you in your role. That's the role that you would take in those negotiations. Okay. Talking then about the interest rate that was agreed, because Mr. Cardiff says that there was a little less solidarity in the interest rate from the ECB, and you said that we didn't like the interest rate on the table in the negotiations. Now,
as I understood it, but the NTMA people might have a little bit more visibility on this because that was really their special bailiwick. The principle that had been adopted by the European lenders was that they would charge the same interest rate as the IMF, and the IMF has a set of rules, and you just have to look it up. And but why is it uncertain and complex? Well, the IMF, it depends on what multiple of your quota, and what will be included. Will the reserve tranche be included or not? The loans will be in SDRs. Do you want to hedge the risk of SDRs against euros? So it's quite complicated, and there were some decisions to be taken by the Irish side, and it worked out in the end when swapped into euros at this number, whatever it was, 5.7, 5.8. When we started, we thought it was going to be around the 5 mark, but when the sums were done, it worked out even higher.
This idea of less solidarity. I mean, what?
Well, I mean, as I say, there wasn't any discussion of that. It was fait accompli that the already political decision had been taken in Europe. We will charge the IMF interest rate. Well, that was a high interest rate because of what a high multiple of our quota we were borrowing from the IMF. We were borrowing really high percentages. And I could have imagined that being overwritten, as it subsequently was, by a sense that, no, this doesn't make sense. We're all in Europe here. Everybody else in Europe can borrow money at much lower interest rates. Why are we imposing this very large surcharge? And that was brought down. And that was brought down in June 2011. It would have been nice if that sense had been there earlier on. But Greece hadn't got that, so why could we expect? Both Greece and Ireland got it pretty soon after that. But I don't think there was any room for manoeuvring. The complexity of European negotiations means you can't just say across the table, and about the interest rate, are we okay then with take 3 percentage point off it? No, there are parliaments, there are 19 governments and so on. So
my final question then is in relation to the move into January, February, March 2011, and there was a view in the Department of Finance at the beginning of 2011 that burden sharing might then be acceptable. There was a view that perhaps the view of Mr. Trichet in the ECB had shifted. Were you aware of that at the time? Did you sense that?
Actually,
and where did it come from?
We never committed to not burning the bondholders. we committed to not including the burning of bondholders in the programme, but we never signed any document that said we will never burn bondholders. So it was still there for attitudes to shift. And I remember saying to, even before the election, saying to Brian Lenihan, well, why there's a big payment coming up for Anglo. Have you thought about doing something on that? And he said, I can't go against the whole of the G7. He thought it was internationally politically inconceivable. So that one went. I think it was subsequent to that the Department of Finance, and they had more visibility on this than I had a sense that the Europeans were weakening on the issue of bail-in, especially for Anglo and INBS. Now, I wrote to the Minister, and I think it's in evidence that was provided to you by the Central Bank. I wrote to the Minister, the new Minister, Michael Noonan, offering my advice on this matter, and I said, look, the ECB are firmly against foregoing concern banks, but it is possible that they would accept a bail-in for Anglo and INBS.
Leader, Deputy.
Give that sense to the department that burden sharing might be acceptable then.
From what Kevin has said, I think he picked up as well. Maybe I was the only route, but I think he may have got some independent, because we were all meeting the officials of the Troika, including the officials of the ECB. He could have picked it up independently. I think he probably did.
And just to clarify, you said all of the G7 were against burden sharing, but weren't the UK in favour of it on that teleconference call?
Ireland is not a member of the G7. We hear at second and third hand what happened at the G7 conference call, so only repeating hearsay to say what countries were in favour.